Hi, I'm Bianca Cotton, host of Behind the Confident Smile, and I am here with Pam Bozeman today. We are going to be talking about her journey to raising a king, a black king. Pam, thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so excited. You
Oh,
are the
yes.
dopest person I know, so I'm just excited.
Oh, we're about to lean into this discussion. And in the time of the George Floyds and the Tamir Rices and the Trayvon Martins, wanting to lift up this conversation around raising a black boy into a king in this society. So we're going to go back to when you first found out you were pregnant.
Yes.
What was that like for you when you discovered you were having a boy?
So I think that two different answers. One, I was looking forward to becoming a mother. So the first 15 minutes of awareness were amazing. I felt life instantaneously in a way that I'd never felt it. And I felt a sense of responsibility and wanting to contribute not just something, but somebody to the world. And I wanted to do a good job at being a parent. When I learned later on that I was going to be a mom of a son, I was a little tearful because I understood the extra burden that this young black man would have in the world. And the layers of skin complexion and gender bias, but the role for a young black man in our society and the way that he was going to have to walk in the world meant that I needed to do double time in helping him to be prepared for life as a young black man. So mixed, very much excited and also a little scared about whether or not I was up to the challenge.
Definitely. I can relate to that so much. I felt similar when I discovered I was having a son. The
Absolutely.
excitement and the burden.
Uh-huh.
So this burden piece, who would you say taught you about parenthood and the burden of being a black man?
So I can say that there were lots of examples of parenthood, and they were all very diverse examples. I start with the understanding that I was raised by a village, a very close-knit tribe of matriarchs and patriarchs who really showed great examples of parenting. And I have people in my family who've been married for 60 years. I had a very functional, high-functioning divorced household for myself. My parents were divorced, but they were truly parents and collaborated all throughout my life to help make decisions and give guidance. I married someone who wanted to be a good dad. And so I had lots of examples, albeit they were different in different age groups and different experiences. I understood what parenting was supposed to look like and valued that. But what I take with me as I look back at my son and I together, he's 18 today, is the lessons that I bring forward from my elders. One of my first babysitters, if you will, because my family didn't have outside babysitters. We had family babysitters, was my great-grandmother, if you can fathom, who died in her 90s. And what was amazing about that experience was that I was in the care of an elder who had seen so many things in her life at a different time in her life. Her parents had seen lynchings. She had experienced overt racism. She was also a hellfire. And so she traveled down south and around the country with jazz and blues bands when it was very unpopular for a lady to do so. She broke some of the segregation barriers. And so to have her as my first caregiver while my parents returned to work was really transformative for me. The story that I like to tell is that when we would go either downtown together, and when I was a little girl, or to the Woolco in my neighborhood, we had to get dressed up I had to be dressed to go be around white folk, right? And it was very clear that there was a demeanor that I needed to carry with me. And so she dressed me in this lovely dress and shoes and tights and all the ribbons. And I said, Granny, I look beautiful. I wonder if Daddy will like it. And I can remember these words. And she turned me around by my shoulders and she said, it's important that you like it. Are you beautiful to you? How anybody else sees you doesn't matter. Don't you think you're beautiful? And that
Wow.
was a powerful lesson from a powerful woman who was giving her first lesson of beauty from the inside out, our own
Yes.
reflections, how to see ourselves, right? And I carry those kinds of messages from her, from my father, who was incredibly patient and strong and made me feel safe, to the men in the neighborhood and the women in the neighborhood who, were a part of a working class community. All of those lessons came forward when it was time for me to be a parent. So they were all influential. And I allowed them to speak to me and through me in the biggest challenges of motherhood for me. I had to recall how these folks made it through and humble myself to remember those messages.
Wow. So powerful when I think about the village that you had and continue to have and nurturing, raising, and now advising your
Absolutely.
young adult son.
Absolutely. I can imagine. I mean, this is what it is. I had planned to do a rites of passage party for my son when he turned 13 and had planned it out. And my father passed away right before his 13th birthday. So he passed away in October, and we were celebrating my son's birthday in November. And the rites of passage ceremony was still on. And so I asked the elder male in my family if he would lead in this process. And basically, what we did, we rented a room at a restaurant nearby on the south side. And I invited a circle of men to write letters to my son that he would read prior to that day and posed several questions, right? When you were 13, what was it like? What kinds of things should I look forward to as I grow into my manhood? What does it mean to be a man? And I created a circle around the table where only men could sit. And there were women in the room, but we needed to find a way to pull ourselves back from that. And so during that ceremony, many of these men came to just talk with him and share their story and to also bless him and to let him know that he would never be alone. And my uncle leaned forward and said, I want to give you the words that your grandfather isn't here to give you. And the only reason why he knew those words is because he had known my dad deeply and intimately, and they had grown together. And so his words were so moving, right? Because I could hear my dad's voice in that way. And what he really said was, always respect your mom, no matter what. Always respect your parents, your dad. That's really critical. But when you show up in the world, you have to show up with the greatest amount of integrity. If nothing else, be true, have integrity, respect others as you want them to treat you, and move fearless in the world because your debt has been paid. And what that meant was everybody sitting around that table had gone through something. And so all of us had deposited something in society's debt cabin. So there are certain things that you shouldn't have to fight. There are certain battles you shouldn't have to fight. And he goes on to tell this story about how his great-grandfather had worked in a railroad, how his great-great-grandmother had serviced people in their homes as a home care provider, had taken and raised white children. And all of these stories, my great-grandmother had protested in front of Oakwood Cemetery because it was segregated and she wanted to be buried there, and she was. And so my uncle was just reminding him, things are going to get hard, but so many of us have paid our debt to society. Our prayer is that you don't have to fight those same battles, that you should be able to walk into the world. His godfather and cousin said to him, I want you to get your passport. I want you to
Yes.
travel the world. I want you to have a sense of entitlement. And entitlement isn't necessarily a sense of privilege or affluence, but an entitlement as a world citizen, right? I want you to travel the world and see things because your neighborhood is a phenomenal place, but it has no real reflection of all the diversity there is. And you need to walk in your skin in another land, right?
Agreed.
You need to understand that what it means to be a black man in Chicago in this time looks and feels differently than to be in Accra or Ghana or to be in Paris or to walk through Japan and to be that in your skin is going to feel different and people will respond to you differently. And perhaps you won't know all of who you are until you embrace all of those relationships. So when I talk about community and how we've arrived at this moment of being a good parent to a good son, it was those narratives that were steeped in me, right? And that I was able to reaffirm for my son.
Pam,
Yes.
like, I'm reflecting on what you are sharing and thinking about. When did you make the conscious choice to say, this is how I am going to raise my son based on the principles, practices, and experiences that I experienced?
Ooh, every day. I have to make that decision every day, right? Because there are so many circumstances and situations that will take you outside of who you know yourself to be. And
Yes.
so every day I have to reach back into my elder box, my spiritual elder box, my community, and ask for daily reminders about who I am and who we are so that when I walk into the world, I give it my best. Because there are lots of situations where I think I'm probably very close to losing my mind here. A wonderful story I like to tell a lot because it was an amazing reminder of what it meant for me to move into what I believe was the middle class. And so I took my son, because I could afford it, I was so proud of myself, to Wiggle Worms when he was little. And I wanted him to have the Wiggle Worm experience at Old Town, right? And walk into the room for the first time, and there are children sitting in a circle. And I am the only person of color in that moment. And walking into that space, and I plop my kid down, get his coat off, and I sit him in the circle. And this white woman comes out of her seat, walks across the circle, picks up her child, and moves him away from my son. And there are only a few seconds that you have to really decide who you are and whose you are.
Correct.
Because I thought my knee jerk was, you can do that to me, but you should never think that you can do that to my child. What I needed to do was reach back and think about all of the people who had lined up behind me in my village to help me to understand what I needed to do in that moment. And I looked around the room, and the one thing that I noticed was that there were other white women around the perimeter who were appalled by her action. It is affirming to witness allies in action because I was at one point singularly a black woman. And then in an instant, I was a part of a community that at least identified that we had a problem.
Correct.
I decided to sit in my seat because my kid had no idea what was going on. And I knew that if I had overreacted, I would have alerted him in a way that he would not be able to understand. So that wasn't going to be the right principle. The next thing that happened was that the Wiggle Worms instructor saw what happened, picked up her guitar, moved closer to my son, and allowed him to play.
Oh.
And singled him out in a way that, again, allowed me to put my shoulders back. But I had still in my mind decided that I was going to say some incredibly choice words to her once Wiggle Worms was done. That's what I determined in my spirit. That's what I was going to do. And so when it was done and all of the children had played and it was time to put on our coats, and I got on his coat and I got on my coat, and I had prepared my statement, right? And this other white woman comes over and addresses this offender and says, you are an embarrassment.
Mm.
There was no reason why you should have done that. And the teacher says, perhaps this wouldn't be the best place for you next week.
Oh, wow. So you,
Well, I get rarely to be in spaces where white allies are empowered enough and take the lead. I was accustomed to having to stomp my feet and raise my voice and be the angry black woman. But I was in a moment immersed in a community that knew that children needed to have a moment where they weren't trying to figure out the racial boundaries, either in their physical,
correct.
emotional, or spiritual space. And so I quietly mouthed, thank you, and we departed.
What's up, Chicago? I'm Darius Caffey, and I invite you to join me for a new episode of The Table on Air with special guest, award-winning songwriter, Jess Logan. Take a look.
That's how I strive to live my life, is just always be myself, regardless of what room I go into, just show my soul.
Join the conversation with us on Tuesday, October 31st at 7:30 p.m. on CAN TV Cable, Channel 19, streaming on cantv.org, and available on the CAN TV Plus app. Experience the power of community television.
How did that feel to have white allies stand up?
It was, again, amazing and hurtful that I was yet another generation of mother sitting with another generation of son who was having to live this experience, right? And in that moment, you realize it doesn't matter how much money you're earning. It doesn't matter what kind of car you're driving. You are as black in your car as you are outside of your car. And I was as black in wiggle worms as I was black in any other situation. And that wasn't going to change in my lifetime, and that wasn't going to change in his lifetime. The difference was that there were communities of people and pockets of people that I've come across in my daily life who are disconnected from that message. And I think it's so important to understand that what we hear on the media about how terrible the world is and how divided we are, while there are lots of truths to that, there are other truths. And the other truths are that there are still incredibly amazing people in the world who will help you on your path in parenthood, and hopefully, prayerfully, will help your child on their path, right, as they migrate. And let's not be fooled. That was not a common practice. That was an unusual experience, because I've also been more privy to some old black ladies on the street corner who just happen to call something out or raise their voice or put my son in line or give us a direction. I learned a lot from those women as well. But in those rare moments where you find yourself in community, I just learned how to appreciate it. I will say something that's been very powerful for me. 18 years old by society standards is the moment of kind of adulthood.
Cool.
It has not been for me. I'm a recovering helicopter parent. Right, I'm a recovering helicopter parent. And
You're like, it ain't over for me.
you know, I'm trying to get my head in the game. So for all these years, as an overprotective black mother, I have walked in front of my son. Just a step or two, right? But when I felt danger, I would step in front of him. When I would feel that the weather was poor, I would get in front of him so that I could at least test the weather before he got out the door. But in this last year, my king, right, my king has started to take the lead. And that has, again, been another milestone in our development, right?
Yes.
That somehow my son learned how to get in front. Somehow his grandfather's words about putting a woman on the inside as you walk down the street resonated with him. And the day that he put me on the inside, I felt honor and I felt safe, even though it was my baby. And so this journey, right, to raising a king is our need, even in our recovering state of helicopter, that we need to let these kings lead when they're ready. And so when my son says, Mom, I think I got this, I have to let him get this. The bass in his voice, the hair on his face, the stagger and swagger in his walk has indicated by all means that he is ready and that I've done my job. Will there be other things for me to do as a mother? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But right now, I am relishing the evolution of a king, and moreover, in his time, a king creator.
I am curious about other women who may have surrounded you that may have been younger and moms. Have they ever approached you and said, I see how you interact with your son and how he engages with you. Can you teach me?
I've had girlfriends, associates, lady friends who have asked to be in the same space. And I love it. I love the sisterhood. That gives me so much energy. And I'm glad to have some lessons that I can share. I don't know that it's just wisdom, but certainly some lessons. But one of the best things I think that we as Black women and as Black mothers can do for each other is to continuously see and call out when we are doing imperfectly wonderful mothering. And I think there are so many of us who feel like we're failing and somehow we need the support and advice from others. And I would rather turn the table on that and say, man, I know that was upsetting to you. I saw you hold it in, girl. Or, yeah, I saw him fall over. You couldn't have prevented that, because I think the more that we encourage mommies, right, to learn and grow rather than to grieve in the mistake, right? We are so worried about getting it right. And I just think when sisterhoods come together and when other women say, how do you do it? I answer them just the way I answer you, one day at a time. I didn't get it all right. I got on my lipstick and my hair is combed today, but you should have seen me last week, baby girl. Or, yes, my son is a mannerable, intelligent, handsome young man. So is yours.
Yes.
So is yours. So is yours. Well, Pam, your son is majoring in this, but your son is excelling in that. And he couldn't have done that without you being who you are. And just lifting each other up. It's not about critiquing what you've done, right? Because your situation and your life path has been different. Right?
Yeah.
I had a bestie who told me, oh my God, I had a meltdown. We were both going through a divorce. One of the most outrageous and angry moments of both of our lives. And she said, Pam, I had this meltdown in front of my kid, and now I feel bad. And so I said, your child is going to be so amazing because of that.
Yes.
Because they're going to see your resilience, and they're going to see how to, manage anger the right way and the wrong way. And they're going to learn some things about what it means to be an adult and how to persevere and what grit looks like. And they're going to learn a lot about how men and women struggle.
Yes.
And what it means to struggle
it's real
respectfully,
life.
and it's real life. And when your child goes out into the world and meets on conflict, they won't hit the ground from fear of raised voices. They won't run away from conflict. They won't be fearful because someone's angry. Instead of leaning in, you've taught him how to lean forward and into people, right? And so it made her feel better, right?
Yeah.
Because you're human and you were angry and you got pissed off and you said some stuff.
And
right?
that perspective shifting, right? What I hear is trying to be perfect. And where does this idea of perfection come in?
European, systemic, racist overture and experiences. This idea of perfection really doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in nature.
Anywhere.
It doesn't exist in the universe that we know it. It's beautiful and sometimes symmetrical, but nothing about us is perfect. However, we've allowed, I think, sometimes white beauty standards to tell us what beauty is. We've allowed kind of white academia to tell us what perfect English sounds like. And we've often allowed images of what perfect motherhood looks like to permeate our own reality. Perfect motherhood in the Black community for a long time has been about survival.
Yes.
Did your baby get home safe? And that has been some level of victory, right?
Yeah.
And so for us, as we define this, it is about making sure that we are providing good mental health, making sure
Yes.
that we are providing a good spiritual foundation for our children, making sure that our girls are growing into robust women who don't need permission to be women. And are not looking for someone to make them whole, but that they're showing up whole in the world. But most importantly, raising Black men to create their own realities instead of waiting for someone to gift them with it.
Yes.
Right? And that's what I mean when I say king creator. It's not enough for you just to get to be 21 or 25 or 35. It's really going to be about what you create in the world. And the pursuit of happiness and joy should always be crouched in understanding who you are and whose you are. So you're not pursuing someone else's definition, but you're pursuing and creating what is going to work for you. I live in a country right now where we're banning books.
Yes.
Let's think about that for a minute.
Right.
We have a moment in our history where we are bereft with trying to erase people and their experiences and their history, and worse, their contributions. And if we're not careful, that will really happen. That can really, really happen. We can have entire school systems who don't teach in that way. That means that you and I, as mothers, have an obligation, right, to ensure that the stories are told
Yes.
with accuracy, right? No matter how hurtful, no matter how aggressive those stories may be, they are a part of the growth imperative for our young people, because they won't know who they are or whose they are without understanding their elders. So today my son can see tombstones and he can read obituaries, but his life is so much deeper than that. And we've got to bring those narratives to bear with him so that he can create from that.
Pam, as we as we wrap up this insightful book gift that you have so eloquently and in flow share with us today, what is your last piece of wisdom you want to give to a king in the making?
I just want all my kings to understand that they have an awesome, awesome history and that much is expected of them. And while that may seem onerous as a responsibility, that their shoulders were biologically, genetically, spiritually designed to carry that weight of ownership. And that if I could just see any of my young kings right now in prisons, in gutters, in dark places, if they only understood their beginning story, their origin story, and not just when colonization landed on their neck, that they have such royalty coursing through their veins. I just want all kings in the making, no matter their age, because a lot of kings are still becoming in their 30s and their 40s and their 50s, that their origin story is so powerful that they deserve it all the greatness that there is.
Thank you.
Thank you, my friend.
Well, that is a beautiful way to close us out today. Thank you for tuning in.